Well, thank you very much. Good morning from Austria. Good being with you together. Thank you very much, Connie. Really appreciated that word. And it's not easy after such a challenge to move into some historical overview. I hope we'll still be able to handle that switch at this stage. What is the purpose of this session? It's first of all to provide a brief historical sketch on where do we come from as European Evangelical Alliance? Why? In order to help us then to understand and think as we consider the future, where do we come from, what can we learn from our past, and how should we then move into our future? Let's start off by looking at the situation post-World War II. You probably all know that the Evangelical Alliance was established in 1846. So in 1946, it celebrated its jubilee, its 100th anniversary. And in a book published by, for this jubilee, John Ewing, at that time vice president of WEA, expressed his view that WE still had a promising future. However, looking at the reality post-World War II, we see that the reality told a different story, which had a lot to do with the state of the British EA during the late 1940s and 1950s. Because since the beginnings of the Evangelical Alliance, the British EA had always been the driving force of the World Evangelical Alliance. In many ways, the British EA was the WEA, especially since the EA UK added the attribute world to its official name when it became legally registered in 1912. At the same time, we see a new group taking initiative post-World War II, which is the National Association of Evangelicals, the neo-evangelical groupings in the United States. They became increasingly interested in cooperation with Christians in Europe and beyond. The National Association of Evangelicals, NAE, thus emerged as a key player in the further development and renewal of the evangelical movement. The NAE held to the classic evangelical beliefs and to the authority of Scripture, but at the same time rejected the polemical and separatist approach of American fundamentalism. The so-called new evangelicals driving this effort included such key figures as Harold John Okenga and Billy Graham. However, beside the NAE and their interest in Europe, there were other groups like the International Council of Christian Churches, a group remaining within the fundamentalist camp, and they also reached out to Europe, reached also out to evangelical alliances in Europe. For example, Francis Schaeffer in the beginnings was one of their missionaries. And these entities were in competition with WEA, and then also in 1948, as the World Council of Churches was founded in Amsterdam, we had then 3 international bodies which were somehow competing. Because of the weakness of the British Evangelical Alliance, which they acknowledged themselves in the late 40s, it was then the National Association of Evangelicals who initiated the founding or re-establishment of a new global body in Buitschoten in the Netherlands in 1952. It was finally agreed to call this new body not World Evangelical Alliance, but World Evangelical Fellowship. But during that time, it became also very clear that a number of European countries and European Evangelical Alliance struggled with what they perceived as a North American fundamentalist takeover of the old WEA. Again, especially in light of the position on Scripture held by the World Evangelical Fellowship. And it was the term infallible which became an obstacle. This finally led to a situation where the European Evangelical Alliance in 1952 was founded actually as a counter movement to the World Evangelical Fellowship, with the Scandinavian countries, Germany and the German-speaking part of Switzerland being the main drivers of this process. This had also to do with the situation that all of those evangelical alliances were mainly driven by pietistic groups in the official, not state church, but the big churches, Lutheran churches, Reformed churches, which were far more open towards the World Council of Churches than other evangelical groups. And there was a major fear within European countries that they didn't really trust the NAE and thought that was still a very fundamentalist grouping. So the founding members of EEA were Denmark, Norway, Sweden, Germany, the German part of Switzerland, and Austria. Soon also the EEA UK joined, but they also became a member of WEF, whereas most of the other founding members only became members of the World Evangelical Fellowship in the late 1960s. In the following years and decades, further countries joined the EEA countries, and many of you are here from the Netherlands, Portugal, Spain, Italy, Belgium, Cyprus, who were also members of WEF, joined the European Evangelical Alliance. Let's turn to the further development of the European Evangelical Alliance. What was the vision and mission of the EEA in past decades? It's interesting that the earliest constitution of the EEA from 1952 only described how the EEA wanted to operate, but never spoke or wrote anything about its mission and vision. The first constitution I could get hold of addressing the question of vision and mission is from 1973. There was stated, let me quote, "The EEA exists to raise awareness of the unity of believing Christians and to make the gospel known to all people in Europe. It seeks to promote, encourage, and help the theological and evangelistic work of those in Europe who can accept EEA's statement of faith. It supports such work so that the gospel can be proclaimed more effectively and Christian witness and service can be extended and strengthened in all parts of the continent." So, as defined, the purpose of EEA at that time was to strengthen the unity of evangelicals and evangelization. Those stood at the forefront. Looking at the existing sources, which are mainly minutes from these early days, we see that three main issues reoccurred in the first 2 to 3 decades. The relationship of the Evangelical Alliance to the World Council of Churches. And it might surprise some of you that even the General Secretary of the World Council of Churches, Richard Hoofd, was the main speaker at one of our General Assemblies in 1956. So the question on how do we relate with the ecumenical circles was a continuous issue. Secondly, the question on the authority of Scripture became a major point in the coming years, which finally led to a declaration of the European Evangelical Alliance on the authority of Scripture in 1966, which was targeted against the growing influence of theological liberalism, especially in the traditional people's churches in the predominant Protestant countries. And the third subject which reoccurs is how can mission and evangelization be advanced across Europe, looking also at new methods like radio, etc. Many of the European Evangelical Alliance were the main organizers of the Billy Graham crusades of the 1950s and 1960s. With a growing number of national evangelical alliance joining EEA, In the late 60s, the issue was raised, do we need a general secretary? And it was then decided that a general secretary should be appointed, but as a voluntary position to help to do the work. And for the first 10, 20 years, it was either a representative from Germany and then later on, or the EEA UK. Let's briefly touch on some developments during the 1970s and 1980s. Following the Lausanne Conference in Lausanne, Switzerland in 1974, one of the results of that was the forming of a European Evangelical Mission Alliance, which was discussed in detail, and it was proposed for the mission agencies and networks to come up with a clear proposal. It was also then for the first time in 1977 that the European Evangelical Alliance addressed issues of religious liberty, especially in regard to the situation in Spain, in Greece, and also partially in Eastern Europe. And the issue of religious liberty continued as part of the agenda for the coming days and actually to this day. Another reoccurring subject for the European Evangelical Alliance during the 1970s and 80s included the issue of accreditation of evangelical colleges and institutions in Europe. And again, the vision and mission was refined in 1984. It was said, let me quote again, it is the purpose of the European Evangelical Alliance to implement and to present the unity of all believers in Jesus Christ through the Holy Spirit. This purpose should be implemented through the following activities: creating a better understanding and a deeper fellowship among European evangelical Christians, suggestions for evangelism and mission exchange of information on evangelistic needs and opportunities, encouragement of joint activities and exchange of information. Let's turn to the 1990s, which brought major change. In 1919, the EEA UK brought up the issue of a full-time general secretary once again, which was discussed in the board during the following years. The board was very open to this suggestion if the EEA UK was willing to commit to cover the costs of such an employment. This was certainly not acceptable to the British EEA, and they rightly said that it would be unhealthy if the EEA would depend on the financial sources of one evangelical alliances. So what was then introduced was a contribution to the salary for a full-time general secretary into the 1993-94 budget. In 1992, for the first time, the Evangelical Alliance, the European Evangelical Alliance, appointed a full-time general secretary, which was Stuart McAllister. He was a staff member of OM and was also bringing his own support to this role. And he soon after established an office in Vienna and also brought an office team with him, which was financed through the personal support of the staff. With the fall of the Iron Curtain, we see that the EEA experienced rapid growth of new members from Eastern and Central Europe, including Bulgaria, Albania, Croatia, Slovakia, Romania, Czech, and Hungary. We heard 2 days ago already that the social political work was started with Julia as an EEA associate in 1993. And then in 1992, also the European Round Table was introduced, trying to connect the big evangelical players and networks in Europe. Those groups involved included the EEA, Lausanne 82,000, Dawn, the Coalition of for the Evangelization of Europe, which represented mission agencies like OM, YWAM, Youth for Christ, and Campus Crusade, as well as IFES, as well as also the International Charismatic Coalition. And out of this European Roundtable, later on, the Hope for Europe was developing. In 1997, Stuart McAllister announced that he will step down as General Secretary and moved on to Ravi Zaharias International Ministries. And then Gordon Charles Rogers assumed the role as his successor. Let me be very short on the years since then. What we see under the leadership of Gordon Charles Rogers as General Secretary is that we experience a continuous growth. Gordon was especially strong on a relational level, connecting well with many of the key players in the National Evangelical Alliance. And those of you who know Gordon know what I'm talking about. At the same time, initiatives to keep, or maybe even more, to bring hope for Europe, as well as the European Association of Evangelical Missions and the EEA together failed, and Hope for Europe became an somehow independent player. In 2011, Thomas Bucher stepped in as General Secretary after Gordon's successor Nick Trumper resigned after only 2 years in office. A key part of Nick's challenge was EEA's overall financial situation, as EEA was not able to cover his salary. As we look at the tenure of Thomas Bucher's leadership as General Secretary, I see the following developments. Thomas has put a lot of effort into consolidating what has been pioneered during the years before. And I think for the first time, EEA Social Political Ministry in Brussels is not under question any longer. And also a healthy financial foundation has been laid for this ministry. And another major emphasis has been put on helping to develop national evangelical alliances, especially those who had only been founded since the early 1990s. The regional meetings are just one expression of this. Looking ahead, considering our future, Thomas Bucher's term as General Secretary, as it stands now, will come to an end by the end of next year. And as a European Evangelical Alliance, we need to raise some key issues with you, our members, to whom we as board are responsible. Part of that is also in light of the financial situations. We need to be aware that we have only had full-time general secretaries up to now, be it Stuart, be it Gordon, be it Thomas, who brought their own financial support with them, which they had built through their time with either OM or IFS. How do we handle that into the future? How do we build a stable financial foundation for EEA? Who is actually owning and contributing to the European Evangelical Alliance? To this day, we mainly rely on 3 national evangelical alliances, the EEA UK, EEA Germany, and EEA Switzerland. And one of the issues which we need to wrestle with is, what do we as a General Assembly believe is the future of EEA? Why do we believe, what do we believe is the vital part we should play on a European level? And secondly, how will we be able to finance and manage that? Thank you very much for your time and attention.
Thank you so much, Frank, for your contribution, history of EEA, where are we coming from. Because of the time, we will collect any questions to your contribution in the chat. So please continue to ask your questions in the chat box, but we will directly move on to Thomas Bucher's contribution on where we currently are, what is the current state of EEA, and then we'll take the questions jointly after your contribution, Thomas. So over to you, Thomas. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthias. I hope it's not my internet connection which is weak. I didn't hear much of what actually Frank was wrapping up with, which was supposed to be very important. I will try to pick up from Frank, and to some degrees, I have to say, what Connie actually mentioned has already been very instrumental, very important for this contribution. I will try to build on what Frank has said and take it forward, but in a very high level, how can I say, from 30,000 feet. So I will not touch on stories and so on, but I will try to give you other input, fundamental input. And I would like to start with this question: what gave Fridays for Future significance? It was not just a voice in the wilderness from one person, and it was not just a little movement. It was actually a groundswell with impact into highest circles of government and economics, a movement asking uneasy questions, demanding answers and actions, accusing and threatening. It could not be ignored anymore. What gave the church significance from its very beginning? It was not just a voice in the wilderness. There were many voices, there were people, was noticeable movements, voices which addressed the deepest longing of people. There were people willing to suffer for what had given them hope and perspective for their lives and beyond. But not just voices, there was concern for the marginalized, the ones without rights, for women, for orphans, for babies left by the wayside, for the sick, for the hungry, and so on. And this movement too has kept disturbing the influential in all spheres of society and has followers from all walks of life. What dimmed the lights of Fridays for Future for the time being? A tiny virus. The issue of concern for this planet was still there. It was noted that pollution went down, but the movement as such has pretty much vanished for the time being. What made the light of the church shine brighter? A tiny virus. Many churches across Europe report increased interest in the gospel. Many churches got involved, helping hands-on by providing for the needy. True, what used to be social action of the church has become expected services of the state in many European countries. But caring for lonely people, bringing hope and perspective to people cannot, in fact, will not be done by social action and social services. Local churches in this virus crisis very much equal life-giving local traction. And this local traction is supported by national evangelical alliances and were needed by the EEA and even by the WEA. Just as an example for many other national EAs, look at the regular newsletter of the Italian EA, which I get. A lot of advice and input for their members. Check out the website of the Irish EA and you find loads of resources. Ask various channel secretaries and they will tell you about their added opportunities in national and local media. Some are really astounding stories. One channel secretary said, "Within a few weeks, I got more opportunities and openings than I was hoping to have at best in the next 5 years." And a good number of national stories and resources have made their way to the EEA dance floor and have been picked up by other members, have helped them to have local traction. What is the aim of my speech? Do I want to launch a discussion on the EEA and the Corona crisis? No, this is not my aim. There is actually room for this topic after the official part of this meeting in the coffee breakout rooms. If you have time to hang around, feel free to join and you will have this opportunity. But I thought this actually, this virus situation actually shows something which is very much Evangelical Alliance. It shows that local traction is very much on the level of the church. It is not directed from a central European or even world headquarters. Local traction is neither directed from a national level. It happens where local churches are getting involved hands-on so it can be felt. and local churches are served and supported, yes, by their denominations, but beyond that, by their national EAs, and they are supported by the EEA. What I want to carve out broad strokes is how I see the EEA working these days. There is no room for stories, as I said in my presentation, but you have already heard stories, and you will hear more stories, which undergird what I tried to put across in a few minutes. Here, I would like to make a small insertion. The EEA claims to represent 23 million evangelicals in Europe, based on the regular research of the French sociologist Sébastien Fath. When asked to show our registers, we usually have a challenge. We do not have registers. We are a movement, and we have light touch structures serving local traction. But this movement has and can be noticed because it is not just a claim or a voice. It can be noticed because it has local traction. Evangelical churches and organizations united by their Lord, and here I do not want to repeat what Frank Hinkelmann has explained so well in his presentation just a few minutes ago, but just state again how unity in itself is such a strong testimony to the onlooking world. To continue my small insertion, when we are asked about our annual financial turnover, people can hardly believe it. It is below 350,000 euro. This is very little compared to the local, national, and European traction we have. So why is a European EA needed? Very simply put, to deal with the leftovers from the national EAs. This is not meant demeaning. It means there are issues which cannot be dealt with on local church level, nor on denomination level, nor on national EA level, which means there are very distinct leftovers for the European EA. But why is this work for the European EA to do? Because it is based on the same foundation as national EAs, their members go about their work. Here are some foundational Bible verses from John's Gospel, chapter 17. That all of them may be known, may be one, Father, just as you are in me and I am in you. May they also be in us, so that the world may believe that you have sent me. I have given them the glory that you gave me, that they may be one as we are one. It is ongoing wrestling how to transfer these verses, which have been chosen as foundation for the Evangelical Alliance since its beginning, into practical work. These verses provide the why for the Church and the Evangelical Alliance. When Christians are one, they show that Jesus has been sent by the Father. They show his glory. This unity takes the glory, God's glory away, and it usually means that someone else gets the glory, gets the honor. Unity glorifies God, points people to him, convinces people that God the Father has sent his Son. Unity makes the love of God visible and builds his kingdom. This unity makes God's love invisible and hinders the growth of the kingdom. And I'm actually often surprised how this very simple fact is neglected in our work. The Evangelical Alliance at its best is key kingdom work by displaying unity of the body of evangelicals. Summarized, I would like to put it like this. Together we love Europe. Together we love Jesus Christ. Together we love Europe. Together we want to see movements of Jesus followers glorifying God and serving people across Europe. And how do we want to be seen going about this work? Or said differently, how do we behave? We have actually looked at this at the staff retreat in January and have come up with several terms. We see ourselves firstly as uniting. This is ongoing hard work. It is not easy to sell. It is the glue, it is the mortar. Without mortar, a wall of bricks will fall apart, but mortar does not get noticed. It is assumed to be there, not very spectacular. Enabling others. Again, a rather unpopular work. If you do not do the work yourself, why do you need to exist? Why do you need the resources? EA UK puts this very succinctly, and I believe they are right. We want to be a one-stop for all shop. There is a place on the website of EEA UK with the title, What Our Members Offer. It is attractive to be a member of the EEA UK because EEA UK is known to churches and organizations as the shop where you find the link to the connection and the resources you are looking for. It does not do all these things, EEA UK, but it offers them. And it is not expert in all these things, but its members are. The EEA keeps building to do this on the European level, a place where you as national EAs, affiliates or networks can go to put your contributions and profit from other contributions, to be connected and to be equipped. Thirdly, relational. Some years ago, we dedicated the General Assembly to the R factor, the relational factor. We were convincingly told how important this R factor was, how things really changed when there was dedicated attention to the various facets of building and strengthening relationships, a prime value for the Evangelical Alliance. And it is possible if we practice love and unity. We came up with some more of this, how do we behave? The EEA, we have a prophetic voice. This is an aspired value. The EEA often mirrors uneasy truth to churches and the wider society, because from its vantage point, it discerns what is happening throughout Europe through prayer, listening, and working with its members. And actually, this is also what happens on national level. The next four values are underlying values. They need to be present for our work to go forward. Humility. It should guide our work. And actually, we know we are humble if we are told so, not if we claim it. Prayerful. This has been important from the beginning of the EEA. And that's actually something which I believe should be important also in our meetings. That's why I have introduced these times of quietness. And I hope we will also have some prayer today. Bible-centered. Frank has already said how important this was, that we build on the Bible, and because this has been a concern for the Evangelical Alliance since its foundation. We are church-focused. I have already mentioned this, how important that church focus is. All we do needs to have that focus, should ultimately serve the church. And if the church feels it is profiting, it will be more willing to invest resources into a national Evangelical Alliance and even a European Evangelical Alliance. What do we do? I'm only mentioning the topics, and we'll leave it to you to read the details in the EEA mission statement. We connect for common purpose, we equip for integral mission, we represent with a united voice. Now, how will we succeed? In our last staff retreat, we have put it like this. We are open-minded and embrace diversity. We are good news people who make things simple. We empower others, do what it takes, and stay lean. We are open-minded and embrace diversity. There is no one-size-fits-all for Europe. Our national EAs have different histories which shape their theology and their take on politics, ethics, and the various societal themes. It is at times quite a challenge to come up with EEA public policy position papers. That's actually why we have an authorization team which agrees on these on behalf of all of you. We are good news people who make things simple. Generally, we want to be known for what we are for and not what we are against. Even when we are dealing with sticky issues, we want to keep this in the forefront, what we are contributing and what we add to life and relationships. And we want to communicate in a way which is understandable to people in the church and on the street. Keep things simple. We empower others, do what it takes, and stay lean. I've already touched on this, and I will leave it like that. What is most important right now? In the past years, we have tweaked the systems and we have made use of modern technology. This means you have now an EEA which is much more efficient and delivers more, but with the same resources as before. There are more conversations going on than ever before, not only the physical meetings, but also the regular Zoom calls. And that started way before the Corona crisis. This means we connect better and information and insights flow more freely. There are more news items, processes, and good practices being captured and shared. This means we better equip our members. Because there is a better conversation going on, because we capture more news, processes, and good practices on the EA level, we have a much better chance to understand what is needed and can represent our members much better on the European level. It is to some degrees not so spectacular. It is more yeast and salt work, but bread will not be good without it. So it is much needed work and it makes a huge difference in the long run. But we still have the same financial base, a thin base. At the time being, the EEA runs on a financial model which is very difficult to sustain. And here is what you need to make your mind up. In our conversations, we get the feedback that the EEA is needed, wanted, and appreciated. If this is true, if you are really interested to see the EEA go about its work, what is your commitment to resource the EEA? And I'm not just talking about money. This is win-win kingdom work, and it is true for national, European, and world level. The more you put into the EEA, the more you get out of it, the more you profit. Open hands share and open hands can be filled. And this is not about building an organization. It is about contributing to build God's kingdom. We know that this happens when lives are changed, when we can proclaim, as Jesus did, the blind receive sight, the lame walk, those who have leprosy are cleansed, and the deaf hear. The dead are raised, and the good news is proclaimed to the poor. Will we pull together and will we pray in action to see this happen? We are all invited to do so.
Thank you so much, Thomas. And thank you to both of you, Frank and Thomas, for these very rich contributions with a lot of food for thought. So that's why we can only do a 3 hours digital conference, because it's actually a full day conference until you've processed and digested everything that was said in those, actually it's only 2 hours, in those 2 hours. We do have time at least for one question before we move on. We only also have one question from Fotis in the chat, and Frank and Thomas, I don't know who wants to, or if you both want to answer it, but Fotis has asked, where are we today as EEA in our relationship with WEA and also Lausanne movement? Well, this could also take hours to answer, and I ask both of you to maybe constrain yourselves to a few sentences. Frank, you want to start?
Yeah, let me start with WEA, as I'm also on the International Council of WEA as a vice chair. I believe our relationship with the World Evangelical Alliance has been a very good one. I think one of the challenges right now which we face, which is not just a question of the European region, but also the other regions, is much more, how do we define the role of the region, and how do we define the role of the World Evangelical Alliances? Who should be the driving force on a global level? Should the nations represented by the regions initiate things on a WEA level, or are we there as a region to implement what WEA wants to do? And I think a number of us also on the international executive, I was just speaking to 2 of the members of the international executive, of the executive of the International Council today and 2 days ago, would say we see our role as a global body to represent what the nations, our members, and the regions want us to do. And it's a work in progress. Thanks.
Concerning Lausanne, this is actually World Evangelical Alliance level to some degrees, but it is also, of course, European level when it comes to the conference, which will be held next year. And we have actually recently taken up this conversation and are very confident that we are actually finding good connections to cooperate and to work together. So this is work under construction, and I'm actually looking forward to have further conversations and see how we can promote each other's work and how we can actually profit from each other and how we can together profit the church and national alliances and our members in Europe.
Maybe
just
one further comment. In a book published by Lausanne, there is a helpful article published on the Lausanne WEA or /EA relationship, which we can make available as well. That will help to understand some of the broader questions.